Well, I learned the benefits of a coaching culture for organisations very early on in my life. I started my career working at Virgin very closely with Richard Branson. There were only 20 of us there, and we were all under 25. And the place was a huge, first of all, it was huge fun to work in, but we were pulling the rug out from under the big record companies. We were having all the hits and achieving the impossible. And it really did feel like a culture where you felt you could achieve the impossible, and then you went on and did it, 6 impossible things before breakfast. And later, I became very successful there, as a lot of people did, and later I moved into the corporate world in the music business, because Virgin at that time was quite a small company. And I moved into the corporate world at board level. I was a managing director at Virgin, and I moved into a board level into the corporate music business, because I thought with the bigger budgets I could achieve so much more. And in fact, what I found was I could achieve so much less. And it was because there were a lot of politics, and people seemed to be working against each other. They were focusing more on stopping people achieving things than trying to get people to achieve things. I couldn't understand this. It made me start thinking about management and cultures, and this was in the 1980s. And then eventually I moved into the world of leadership and coaching about 15 years ago. And I realised quite soon that what people term a coaching culture today was the culture that we had at Virgin. And I think Branson is quite well known as being a natural coach, a coaching leader now, a good example of a coaching leader. And it made me really start to try and distill, well, what was it that made the difference? And it came down to 3 things, like the pillars of a coaching culture. There are 3 things that hold it up. And one of them is that everybody takes a lot of responsibility for their own work. And at Virgin we had to do that because nobody knew anything at all. My first job there was to run the music publishing company. I didn't know what a music publishing company did, but fortunately neither did Richard Branson. So it had the effect, because there was no one there to tell us what to do or to tell us when we were doing it wrong. We put a lot more effort into research and coming up with ideas and seeing them through. And I say to people now, I say to managers now, if you are checking your people's work all the time and constantly changing it and telling them what to do, they're not going to bother to do it themselves, because why bother when someone else is going to change everything? So that was the first pillar or principle of a coaching culture. And then the second, and these 3 are all equal, the second one is having self-belief, confidence and self-belief. And of course, we were 20-year-olds, we didn't have any real self-belief. We had a lot of bravado, a lot of chutzpah, but no real confidence at all. And you would take the responsibility to do your research, come up with these great ideas, and then you'd have to go to Richard Branson to get the funds to put your idea into practice. And in a lot of organisations, the response you get when you come up with something new is all the reasons why it won't work. We tried this in '98 and it didn't work then. Oh, it's never been done like this before, so this is the way we do things here. And of course, you very soon lose confidence in your own idea and think, well, it was a terrible idea anyway. Well, the opposite thing happened at Virgin. Branson was so happy to be surrounded by all these really talented people, and he was paying us all peanuts. And to see us coming up with all these great ideas of how to further his business, he was thrilled, and he wouldn't have any idea whether what we were saying was going to work or not, but his response was, this is amazing, fantastic, you're brilliant, wow, I can't wait to see this working. So he would tell us that it was going to work, and therefore we went out and made it work. And I think Henry Ford has a great quote, which is in my book, which is something like, if you believe you can do something, you probably can. If you don't believe you can do something, then you probably can't. Well, of course, it's all very well having lots of confidence and self-belief and positive feedback and so on, but of course, most of the time, a lot of the time, the things we went out and did went wrong because we didn't know what we were doing. And there was no one to tell us when things were going wrong. And this was a very crucial part of the culture, which was, it was a blame-free culture. And every mistake that made, everything that went wrong, it was almost a cause for celebration, because it was the learning stepping stone that we were that much closer to being able to get it right. And of course, because we were supported in taking risks and making mistakes, we tried things out, we tried risky things out, things that hadn't been done before. And because we did things in a way that hadn't been done before, sometimes we struck lucky and we got better results than the way things had always been done before. So I say that I believe that if those three things, if those three pillars are in place, they will hold up the coaching culture. If any of one of those fails, then the coaching culture will not necessarily fail, but it won't be complete. In my book, I give a 10-step plan for creating a coaching culture, and I've really tried to distill it down to 10 points that I think you could overlay and apply to any type of organisation. And we work with big corporates, big multinational corporates. We work with little consultancies or little small businesses, county councils, a lot of work in schools. And with all of these organisations, we've taken the same approach. And it's things like looking ahead to really find out what everybody wants out of this before you design the programme. For example, our starting point is not to bring in decide who you're going to use to implement the programme and bring them in and start training people or whatever, or start giving managers coaches. That's not the starting point. That doesn't actually come until point 5. And before that, you've got things like identify all the stakeholders and talk with them. And by the stakeholders, I mean not just the very senior managers who maybe don't obviously seem interested in a leadership programme and they don't think it's anything to do with them. Ask them what they would want out of a leadership programme. The people who've got to go on it, who are usually the last ones to be consulted, what will they want out of a training programme, or what will they want out of having a coach? And the beauty of it is, if you ask all of the stakeholders, if you involve them all in the planning stage, it's not just that you will end up with a programme that's designed, that's exactly right for them. They will all have become engaged in the process. So the principle of my whole 10-step plan is to use a coaching style to deliver it. It's a plan that's in a coaching style and based on a coaching model. And the coaching style engages people, it encourages people to take responsibility, and it motivates them in terms of achieving the results. So the plan does the same thing. Of course, there are quite a few challenges, and it's different with every organisation, but I have found there are really 3 main challenges that keep coming up over and over again. These are the questions that I most get asked by managers who are thinking of bringing in a coaching culture. One of them is, how do I get the senior people on the programme, and how do I get the support of the senior people? How do I get them to embrace the programme? The second one is people saying, I don't have time to coach, because they have an impression that coaching is about sitting down listening to people's problems. And the third one is managers who've done a bit of coach training and learned the coaching skills, and they're very confused about when do I have to coach and when do I have to direct. So I'll just go into a bit more detail on each of those 3, they're all covered in the book. And so the first one is how to get the senior managers involved. And it's very true that sometimes you can't do this. I mean, certainly people look at Virgin and say, well, Richard Branson owned it. He was at the top of it. He started it. And the culture just, went down by osmosis to everybody. And it still does today. And that's true. So obviously it's the best way is to start with the senior management. What often has happened to me is that the senior manager will say, fix my team. They're not motivated, it's their fault, And I'll go and talk to the team, and everyone in the team will say, please fix our manager. And of course, you can't always get them on board. So the good news is that if they don't come on board, it's not really a problem. Most coaching programs start somewhere in the middle of the organisation with middle management. And as I said before, coaching is a sort of a happy virus. It spreads throughout the organisation. People notice the difference. If a manager has had a coach or learned coaching skills, people will see the atmosphere change around that manager. They will see better results and so on. And I had an example where I worked with a team of very senior people, of board directors, who were not working well together. And I worked with them for 6 months, and I worked with each of them individually with coaching sessions, and I gave them some training as well. I didn't force anybody to do it. And there was one man who was in his 60s and very entrenched in his old authoritarian management style. And I thought, he's probably never going to come on board. You know, we're just going to have to work around him, and everybody will have to learn to get on with him and so on. And I'll give them some skills for doing that. And after about 3 months into the programme, he came up to me one day and said, when am I going to get one of your sessions then? And I thought, that's it. And I hadn't had any dealings with him at all. He'd just seen the difference from working from the other people, and he'd heard them talking about it. And I find that's what happens in companies. People will see the difference, and the senior managers will then start to want some too. It's happened with me in every company that I have worked with in any length of time. This is what has happened. Going on to managers who think they don't have time to coach, this only ever happens before they've actually learnt the skills. And within an hour, I think, once they practically try out some simple coaching skills, they immediately understand how much time this is going to save them. And of course, in the long run, they realise they're going to have to put a bit of time into listening to people, spending more time listening to people, and asking for solutions instead of giving them, which is the coaching style. And that will take more time. It will also take more time because people aren't used to it. It's not what they expect of their boss. But once that becomes a habit, what happens is people start to think before they come into the meeting. They don't just come into the meeting and say, what do you want me to do? They do what I did at Virgin. They come up with a whole plan and think it through, and then what they present to you is a solution, not a problem. And of course, once that culture kicks in, it builds a lot of motivation, it builds a lot of trust. And at the end of the day, maybe, who knows, 3 months, 6 months, a year, once you can actually build that trust with all of your team and they get used to that way of working, you only have to interrelate with them when they come to you because they need your input. And you can trust them to come to you when they need your input, even if they've done something wrong. Because so many people spend so much of their time and energy covering up mistakes. And if they could go to their manager and say, I made a mistake, how can we put it right, or help me put it right, it would save a lot of time, but they can't do that because they're going to get beaten up by it. So that one, again, it's the practical experience of coaching in both of these examples is what convinces people, and that is a fundamental of coaching. It's self-directed learning, it's a self-directed experience. So you apply those principles when you're trying to introduce the culture. The culture has to introduce itself at the end of the day. And the third challenge that often comes up is that when managers have learnt a little bit of coaching skills, they get very confused about when to coach and when to direct. And they think that they're going to be able to use these coaching skills all the time, and they ask their staff instead of telling them and so on. And of course they very quickly trip up because they get to be in a situation where they have to tell people what to do. They're a manager, it's a manager's job. Sometimes you have to say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Now, in a situation where people are being treated like that all the time, they'll be very demotivated. In a situation where they are being asked for their own solutions as often as is possible, and usually it's most of the time at one level or another it's possible, they will be highly motivated, they will have taken control and responsibility for their own area. And if a leader, if their boss comes along and says, we can't do it like that, we have to do it like this, it actually is welcomed. In Virgin, this kind of thing, it's a welcome. Oh God, that's useful information I can add to my project that I'm doing. And so there is no such thing as negative feedback in a coaching culture, because anything you offer to people which is improving or learning or whatever, or just telling them you're doing it wrong, do it like this, is taken as a helping hand, and people still feel that they're in control. I think there's a misconception that coaching is all about learning skills, a set of skills. I know how to listen now, I know how to ask questions and so on. And my own personal belief is coaching is a mindset. It's not a set of skills, it's a mindset, it's an attitude. And the mindset is treating people with respect, listening to them and respecting what they're saying, even if you can't go along with it, caring about their development. Now, if you don't get excited about giving someone a stage and giving someone some leeway and watching them rise to the challenge and develop and grow, if that doesn't excite you, you shouldn't be a manager. Go and find something else to do. Because once you're a manager and a leader of people, your job is no longer making the products. Your job is making the people who make the products. And that's why the attitude to them really creates the way they will interact with you and each other and the customers and their job in general. So what we try to do on our courses, when we train managers to be coaches, we try to teach them how to step into that space of that mindset. And the skills will be useful. They will help them be able to do that. But if the intention isn't there behind the words of developing people and getting excited by their development and treating people with respect, if that intention isn't there, it will fail. So once people learn the skills and learn how to stand in this space, then we find that they can move smoothly from being a directive manager, being a mentor and guide, being a coach. They can move smoothly along that continuum without anybody seeing the join in the space of a 10-minute conversation. I've tried to go into a lot of practical examples in the book to back up the theories so people can see, because I think when you describe a theory, people often say, well, that won't work in my organisation. So I've tried to include a large number of case histories about one-to-one coaching or examples in organisation of leadership programmes and so on to show how the theories are actually put into practice. I've gone to the experts in the field, all the senior coaches and leadership change consultants that I know who've been in the business for a long time. So I've wanted to draw on their expertise. So it's not just about my experience and what I know. I've assembled all of the expertise I know of in the book and asked them to contribute their own personal case histories. I've also, in terms of going into the how-to, I've explained how to coach. You know, there are 9 basic coaching skills there, including listening, questioning, goal setting, doing coaching feedback, team building. There are techniques of structures of meetings, how to have meetings and so on. So that's all covered. And then there are 25 related skills. One thing I found very confusing, when I came into coaching and leadership myself about 15 years ago, I had a wealth of management experience to draw on, of course, and coaching experience from my work with Richard Branson. What I found confusing is people were talking about all these things like NLP, MBTI, 360-degree feedback, transpersonal coaching, transactional analysis, you know, everything from the wilder shores of psychology through to very basic business management. And I felt I needed to know at least what all these terms meant, and then I could decide whether I needed to become expert in them or employ them or employ people and so on. And I think it's the same for companies. You know, if you're a learning and development executive, you need to know out of this sea of possible interventions, you need to really understand how they work, why they work, in what situations they work, and you need to be able to form an opinion of whether you think they do work, because opinion is widely divided. None of this is scientifically tested. So I've included, for Training Journal, I was writing for Training Journal at the time, and I embarked on a 3-year monthly column in Training Journal where each month I explored a different skill or intervention or related technique, anything that coaches might have to use or people involved in creating a coaching culture might want to bring in. I researched them all, I explained them all, I gave an opinion in terms of pointing out any pitfalls that I thought might happen, because for my yardstick, I measured them against the times that I'd been a manager in a company and a director and thought, well, if I use this with people, what would it have worked for me? And for many of them, I got experts to write a case history from an expert point of view of their work in actual companies using them or their work with one-to-one clients. And altogether in the book there are 36 case histories, because there are a lot of case histories which back up the skills, as I said, and the techniques for about one-to-one coaching, working in companies and team building and so on.